Good morning, Janice.
Morning, Anthony.
Today we'll talk about when receiving an inheritance changes your solo estate plan. So how does receiving an inheritance change your own solo ager estate plan? A family inheritance will increase the size and sometimes the complexity of your estate. So let's discuss what this means for our solo agers. Okay. So first, it does increase, or I'm assuming we wouldn't even be talking about this unless it does increase the size of your estate,
Right.
because you have inherited something. So how does this result in a more complex probate for you? Later on down the line. So a couple ways. Number one, the more you have, the higher risk of conflict, just because there's more at stake. Where if your niece and nephew are going to each receive $20,000, they go, okay, that's a good chunk of change, but nothing worth hiring lawyers over.
Right.
But if they're now each receiving $200,000,
Little different.
I don't know. Let me do a different example. If one was receiving 10,000 and one was receiving 30,000, whatever. But if one was receiving 100,000 and the other's receiving 300,000, then the one who's receiving less might think, hey, it's my upside is I can gain $100,000 and I have funds to hire an attorney and make it worth fighting over. So yeah, there's more at stake, more risk of conflict. Inheriting makes your subsequent probate more complicated also because potential taxes. And we're not just talking about estate tax. Most people don't really hit that threshold. I think it's about $1 million or $11 million right now, excuse me. But when you inherit assets or you have just more assets in general, you're more likely to have capital gains issues or even ordinary income tax clearance issues on your final 1040. The higher your net worth or the more complicated or diverse your assets. So if you've just inherited a bunch of stock and you made a bunch of moves buying and selling them to sort of organize your personal estate, after inheriting them, that all hits your 1040 and could make getting final tax clearance on your estate, if you die kind of shortly after,
right.
could be a little more complicated.
Right.
And then lastly, it depends on what you're inheriting. If your current solo ager estate is, bank, brokerage, and real estate, pretty normal or pretty, you're comfortable with what you have, but now you inherit commercial real estate, or you inherit a share of a small business, or some art, or some Bitcoin. These are new, and they can add twists and things that you weren't expecting. Perhaps the executor you chose, is not really well equipped for these different types of assets. So something to think about.
Yeah. Yep. And those are much more complicated during the process. Right.
And actually, I just alluded to, so then do you now need a professional executor perhaps? So as a solo ager, since you don't have a sort of a default, I guess, a spouse or an adult child, you probably chose a friend or maybe a close but distant family member, a close that you're friendly with but distant in terms of the family tree is what I meant.
Right.
To be your executor. But now that it's more complicated, it's much more burdensome and difficult to be. It's already burdensome and difficult to be an executor. But if you're adding, a small business or commercial real estate, something like that, it could be more difficult or risk of conflict. You're asking a lot more of whoever you're asking to serve as your executor. And maybe it's time now to consider hiring a pro.
Absolutely. And we've talked about Bitcoin. That's not, if you don't know what you're doing, that's definitely complex.
Oh, for sure. So another way that you inheriting could subsequently change your estate plan, especially for solo agers, is it may compel you to reduce the amount that you give to your heirs. That seems counterintuitive, right? Like if you just inherited more, why would you give less to your heirs? Here's the thing. Let's use an example from one of our clients. He recently inherited a good chunk from his father who passed away, and his existing estate plan was to give a good chunk to his niece and nephews. Now, he had planned to give them 25% each and 50% to charity of his estate.
Okay.
But now his estate is significantly larger. And in his opinion, 25% of his much larger estate is kind of too generous for this particular set of niece and nephews, right? Just the math doesn't quite add up the same. On top of that, that niece and nephew also inherited from our client's dad. So they already got some family wealth. So there's no need, in his opinion, to add on top of that further with 25% of a larger amount. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So you may decide, Solo Agers, that it's appropriate to reduce the inheritance or what you leave to your heirs based on the fact that your estate has increased. So again, it sounds counterintuitive, but I can see how that makes sense.
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you were planning to leave them, let's say, not a percentage, but maybe 10,000 or something, and now your estate's worth so much more, 25% now could be 100,000, right? And if that wasn't your intention, yeah.
So then lastly, you may actually end up leaving more to charity, which is very commendable. So if your estate is bigger, you have more options on how to give to good causes. You can give more to charity since you now have more and you have plenty to leave to your friends, family in the amounts that you originally intended and still have a lot more left over, right? And I guess more importantly is now that you have a larger amount to leave to charity, there are different techniques that are available to you. There are different strategies, such as using a trust or other estate planning techniques that are more cost justified, which don't make sense if the gift is $10,000 or $50,000, but perhaps make sense when it's more $100,000 and $200,000 or higher, of course. Some of those things just don't. It's not worth the accounting and legal fees to set them up. But once you get to a certain point, the accounting and legal fees are the same and become a smaller and smaller percentage of the gift that you're trying to leave. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's it. We have Solo Agers who are, grateful to have inherited from their older family members and just they see how it impacts. They've told us how it impacts their estate plans. And we thought we'd share that with you so you can either look around corners and maybe plan ahead for when you inherit or just be aware. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And it happens. Like you said, we've seen this just recently. So if you haven't gotten a free copy of Anthony's book, The Solo Ager Estate Plan, there should be a link down in the comments. You can get it on his website.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone, for listening. As always, thanks, Janice, and we will talk soon next time.
Talk soon.